I quite understand what you're saying, Wakanda. Well, I'm afraid I cannot be party to. Mr. Weasley broke off. He had noticed Harry. It was very strange to have Mr. Weasley glare at him with that much dislike. The lift doors closed, and the four of them trundled downward once more. "Oh, hello, Reg," said Mr. Weasley, looking around at the sound of steady dripping from Ron's robes. "Isn't your wife in for questioning today? What's happened to you? Why are you so wet?" "The Axley's office is raining," said Ron. He addressed Mr. Weasley's shoulder, and Harry felt sure he was scared that his father might recognize him if they looked directly into each other's eyes. "I couldn't stop it. They sent me to get Bernie Pillsworth, I think they said." "Yes, a lot of offices have been raining lately," said Mr. Weasley. "Did you try Metiolo Jenks Recanto? It worked for Bletchley." "Metiolo Jenks Recanto?" whispered Ron. "No, I didn't. Thanks, thanks, Arthur." The lift doors opened. The old witch with the anthill hair left, and Ron darted past her out of sight. Harry made to follow him, but found his path blocked as Percy Weasley strode into the lift, his nose buried in some papers he was reading. Not until the doors had clanged shut again did Percy realize he was in a lift with his father. He glanced up, saw Mr. Weasley, turned radish red, and left the lift the moment the doors opened again. For the second time Harry tried to get out, but this time found his way blocked by Mr. Weasley's arm. "One moment, Runcorn." The lift doors closed as they clanged down on another floor. Mr. Weasley said, "I heard you laid information about Dirk Cresswell." Harry had the impression that Mr. Weasley's anger was no less because of the brush with Percy. He decided his best chance was to act stupid. "Sorry?" he said. "Don't pretend, Runcorn," said Mr. Weasley fiercely. "You tracked down the wizard who faked his family tree, didn't you?" So what if I did?" said Harry. "So Dirk Cresswell is 10 times the wizard you are," said Mr. Weasley quietly, as the lifts sank even lower. "And if he survives Azkaban, you'll have to answer to him, not to mention his wife, his sons, and his friends." "Arthur," Harry interrupted, "you know you're being tracked, don't you?" "Is that a threat, Runcorn?" said Mr. Weasley loudly. "No," said Harry, "it's a fact. They're watching your every move." The lift doors opened. They had reached the atrium. Mr. Weasley gave Harry a scathing look and swept from the lift. Harry stood there, shaken. He wished he was impersonating somebody other than Runcorn. The lift doors clanged shut. Harry pulled out the invisibility cloak and put it back on. He would try to extricate Hermione on his own while Ron was dealing with the rainy office. When the doors opened, he stepped out into a torch-lit stone passageway, quite different from the wood-paneled and carpeted corridors above. As the lift rattled away again, Harry shivered slightly, looking toward the distant black door that marked the entrance to the Department of Mysteries. He set off, his destination not the black door, but the doorway he resembled on the left-hand side, which opened onto the flight of stairs down to the court chambers. His mind grappled with possibilities as he crept near them. He still had a couple of decoy detonators, but perhaps it would be better to simply knock on the courtroom door, enter as Runcorn, and ask for a quick word with Mafalda? Of course, he did not know whether Runcorn was sufficiently important to get away with this, and even if he managed it, Hermione's non-reappearance might trigger a search before they were clear of the Ministry. Lost in thought, he did not immediately register the unnatural chill that was creeping over him, as if he were descending into fog. It was becoming colder and colder with every step he took, a cold that reached right down his throat and tore at his lungs. And then he felt that stealing sense of despair, of hopelessness, filling him, expanding inside him. Dementors, he thought. As he reached the foot of the stairs and turned to his right, he saw a dreadful scene. The dark passage outside the courtrooms was packed with tall, black-hooded figures, their faces completely hidden, their ragged breathing the only sound in the place. The petrified Muggle-borns, brought in for questioning, sat huddled and shivering on hard wooden benches. Most of them were hiding their faces in their hands, perhaps in an instinctive attempt to shield themselves from the Dementors' greedy mouths. Some were accompanied by families, others sat alone. The Dementors were gliding up and down in front of them, and the cold, and the hopelessness, and the despair of the place laid themselves upon Harry like a curse. "Fight it," he told himself, but he knew that he could not conjure a Patronus here without revealing himself instantly. so he moved forward as silently as he could, and with every step he took, numbness seemed to steal over his brain, but he forced himself to think of Hermione and Ron, who needed him. Moving through the towering black figures was terrifying. The eyeless faces hidden beneath their robes turned as he passed, and he felt sure that they sensed him, perhaps, a human presence that still had some hope, some resilience. And then, abruptly and shockingly amid the frozen silence, one of the dungeon doors on the left of the corridor was flung open and screams echoed out of it. No, no, I'm half-blood, I tell you. My father was a wizard, he was! Look him up! Alki Alderton. He's a well-known broomstick designer, look him up, I tell you! Get your hands off me, get your hands off! This is your final warning, said Umbridge's soft voice, magically amplified so that it sounded clearly over the man's desperate screams. If you struggle, you will be subjected to the Dementor's kiss. The man's screams subsided, but dry sobs echoed through the corridor. Take him away, said Umbridge. Two Dementors appeared in the hallway of the courtroom, their rotting, scabbed hands clutching the upper arms of a wizard who appeared to be fainting. They glided away down the corridor with him. In the darkness they trailed behind them, swallowed him from sight. Next, Mary Cattermole, called Umbridge. A small woman stood up. She was trembling from head to foot. Her dark hair was smoothed back into a bun, and she wore a long, plain robe. Her face was completely bloodless. As she passed the Dementors, Harry saw her shudder. He did it instinctively, without any sort of plan, because he hated the sight of her walking alone into the dungeon. As the door began to swing closed, he slipped into the courtroom behind her. It was not the same room in which he had once been interrogated for improper use of magic. This one was much smaller, though the ceiling was quite as high. It gave the claustrophobic sense of being stuck at the bottom of a deep well. There were more Dementors in here, casting their freezing aura over the place. They stood like faceless sentinels in the corners farthest from the high raised platform. Here, behind the balustrade, sat Umbridge, with Yaxley on one side of her and Hermione, quite as white-faced as Mrs. Cattermole, on the other. At the foot of the platform, a bright silver, long-haired cat prowled up and down, and Harry realized that it was there to protect the prosecutors from the despair that emanated from the Dementors. That was for the accused to feel, not the accusers. Sit down, said Umbridge in her soft, silky voice. Mrs. Cattermole stumbled to the single seat in the middle of the floor beneath the raised platform. The moment she had sat down, chains clinked out of the arms in the chair and bound her there. You are Mary Elizabeth Cattermole? Said Umbridge. Mrs. Cattermole gave a single, shaky nod. Married to the Reginald Cattermole of the Magical Maintenance Department? Mrs. Cattermole burst into tears. I don't know where he is. He was supposed to meet me here. Umbridge ignored her. Married to Maisie, Ellie, and Alfred Cattermole? Mrs. Cattermole sobbed even harder than before. They're frightened. They think that I might not come home. Spare us, spat Yaxley. The brats of mudbloods do not stir our sympathies. Mrs. Cattermole's sobs masked Harry's footsteps as he made his way carefully toward the steps that led up to the raised platform. The moment he had passed the place where the Patronus cat patrolled, he felt the change in temperature. It was warm and comfortable here. The Patronus, he was sure, was Umbridge's, and it glowed brightly because she was so happy here, in her element, upholding the twisted laws she helped to write. Slowly and very carefully, he edged his way along the platform behind Umbridge, Yaxley, and Hermione, taking a seat behind the latter. He was worried about making Hermione jump. He thought of casting the Muffliato charm upon Umbridge and Yaxley, but even murmuring the word might cause Hermione alarm. Then Umbridge raised her voice to address Mrs. Cattermole, and Harry seized his chance. I'm behind you, he whispered into Hermione's ear. As he had expected, she jumped so violently she nearly overturned the bottle of ink with which she was supposed to be recording the interview, but Umbridge and Yaxley were concentrating upon Mrs. Cattermole, and this went unnoticed. A wand was taken from you upon your arrival at the Ministry today, Mrs. Cattermole, Umbridge was saying. 10 3/4 inches, cherry, unicorn hair core. Do you recognize that description? Mrs. Cattermole nodded, mopping her eyes on her sleeve. "Could you please tell us from which witch or wizard you took that wand?" "Took?" sobbed Mrs. Cattermole. "I didn't take it from anybody. I bought it when I was 11 years old. It chose me." She cried harder than ever. Umbridge laughed a soft girlish laugh that made Harry want to attack her. She leaned forward over the barrier, the better to observe her victim, and something gold swung forward too and dangled over the void. The locket. Hermione had seen it. She let out a little squeak, but Umbridge and Yaxley, still intent upon their prey, were deaf to anything else. "No," said Umbridge. "No, I don't think so, Mrs. Cattermole. Wands only choose witches or wizards. You are not a witch. I have your response to the questionnaire that was sent to you here. Mafalda, pass them to me." Umbridge held out a small hand. She looked so toad-like at the moment that Harry was quite surprised not to see webs between the stubby fingers. Hermione's hands were shaking with shock. She fumbled in a pile of documents balanced on the chair beside her, finally withdrawing a sheaf of parchment with Mrs. Cattermole's name on it. That's pretty, Dolores," she said, pointing at the pendant gleaming in the ruffled folds of Umbridge's blouse. "What?" snapped Umbridge, glancing down. "Oh, yes. An old family heirloom," she said, patting the locket lying on her large bosom. "The S stands for Selwyn. I'm related to the Selwyns. Indeed, there are a few pure-blood families to whom I am not related. A pity," she continued in a louder voice, flicking through Mrs. Cattermole's questionnaire, "that the same cannot be said for you. Parents' professions, greengrocers." Yaxley laughed jeeringly. Below, the fluffy silver cat patrolled up and down, and the Dementors stood waiting in the corners. It was Umbridge's lie that brought the blood surging into Harry's brain and obliterated his sense of caution. That a locket she had taken as a bribe from the petty criminal was being used to bolster her own pure-blood credentials. He raised his wand, not even troubling to keep it concealed beneath the invisibility cloak, and said, "Stupefy." There was a flash of red light. Umbridge crumpled and her forehead hit the edge of the balustrade. Mrs. Cattermole's papers slid off her lap onto the floor, and, down below, the prowling silver cat vanished. Ice-cold air hit them like an oncoming wind. Yaxley, confused, looked around for the source of the trouble, and saw Harry's disembodied wand pointing at him. He tried to draw his own wand, but too late. "Stupefy!" Yaxley slid to the ground and to lie curled on the floor. "Harry!" "Hermione, if you think I was going to sit here and let her pretend—" "Harry, Mrs. Cattermole!"